Kitchban, you picked the wrong old man to accuse. The words were calm, almost gentle, but they hung in the cool Pacific air with a weight no one at Gate 7 could explain. Petty Officer First Class Ryan Cole tightened the steel cuffs around Walter Mercer's weathered wrists and gave the 82-year-old man a long, skeptical stare. The old man's faded canvas jacket fluttered in the ocean breeze, revealing nothing that looked impressive. No medals, no ribbons, no military patches, only worn khaki pants, scuffed brown shoes, and hands marked by decades of quiet labor. Around them, the entrance to Naval Amphibious Base Coronado moved with practiced precision. Security vehicles rolled through inspection lanes. Sailors checked credentials with polished efficiency. American flags snapped sharply above the gate as the morning sun climbed over San Diego Bay. To Ryan, this was sacred ground. Every procedure mattered. Every visitor was verified. Every lie ended here. Walter Mercer. Ryan read from the old driver's license he had removed from the man's wallet. No military identification. No visitor authorization. No scheduled appointment. He looked up with the confidence of someone certain he already knew the truth. Then explain why you walked up to the gate claiming you needed to see Vice Admiral Thomas Hale. Walter met the younger sailor's eyes without the slightest hint of fear. His pale blue gaze remained steady, almost impossibly calm. Because he's expecting something only I can deliver. Ryan let out a short laugh. Several members of the security team exchanged amused looks. They had heard countless stories from people claiming secret meetings with generals, admirals, or government officials. None of them ever ended well. The Vice Admiral is conducting a classified conference this morning, Ryan replied. You don't just walk onto a military installation asking to see him. Walter slowly nodded, accepting the words without argument. I know. That answer somehow irritated Ryan even more. Most people protested. Most people panicked. This old man simply stood there as though waiting for the weather to change. Ryan opened the worn leather wallet again, searching for anything that might support the strange claim. Inside he found little more than a folded grocery receipt, an old family photograph with faded edges, and a weathered plastic card unlike anything he had ever seen. Across the top, barely visible beneath years of scratches, were faded words, Titiline, access by name only. No official seal, no barcode, no expiration date, just those words. Ryan held it between two fingers as though it were an obvious fake. Where'd you print this? Some internet joke. Walter answered quietly. It was issued before computers kept records. The security officers chuckled. Ryan shook his head and slipped the card into an evidence envelope. That's enough. He turned toward Chief Master-at-Arms Gregory Shaw, who had just stepped from the nearby security office after hearing the commotion. Chief, we've got another stolen valor case. Claims he needs to see the Vice Admiral personally. Chief Shaw looked Walter over carefully. Unlike Ryan, he did not immediately speak. Years of experience had taught him that appearances often lied. Still, regulations were regulations. Search him, Shaw said evenly. Document everything. Ryan nodded and reached for Walter's left sleeve. As he rolled back the faded fabric, conversation around the checkpoint quietly faded with it. A black tattoo emerged against sun-weathered skin. It wasn't the polished Navy SEAL trident every sailor recognized. This symbol looked older, rougher, handcrafted. A broken trident rested inside a dark circle shaped like an ocean swell, and beneath its handle were three tiny lines almost hidden by time itself. Ryan stared for only a second before confidence returned to his face. Well, he said with a smirk, lifting Walter's arm so everyone could see it. There's your evidence. Impersonating a Navy SEAL is a federal offense, old man. Walter looked down at the faded symbol as if seeing an old friend after many years. His voice remained almost a whisper. That mark existed long before the one you're wearing. For the first time that morning, something inside the security scanner emitted a sharp electronic tone. Every screen connected to Walter Mercer's temporary file suddenly froze, flickered once, and went completely black. Ryan Cole lowered Walter Mercer's arm just enough to study the faded tattoo more closely, his confident smirk widening as though he had uncovered the final piece of evidence. That is not an official Navy Special Warfare insignia, he declared loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. It is close enough to fool civilians, but not anyone who actually belongs here. Several sailors standing in the inspection lane nodded in quiet agreement. They had spent years protecting one of the most respected military communities in the country, and every so often someone appeared wearing counterfeit patches, fake medals, or invented stories. To them, Walter Mercer seemed no different. The old man neither protested nor defended himself. He simply looked at the weathered symbol resting on his own arm, as though the faded ink belonged more to another lifetime than to the skin it occupied today. "You are making a mistake," he said softly. Ryan folded his arms. "No, sir. You made the mistake when you walked through this gate pretending to belong." Chief Gregory Shaw stepped closer, his expression far less emotional than Ryan's. He had learned long ago that loud certainty often concealed hidden doubt. He studied the tattoo for several long seconds without speaking. The broken trident looked hand-drawn rather than professionally inked. The circular wave surrounding it was imperfect, almost uneven, and the 3 tiny marks beneath the handle appeared intentionally placed instead of decorative. It did not resemble any official military insignia Shaw had encountered during 24 years of service. Still, something about its age unsettled him. "Photograph it," Shaw instructed calmly. Ryan removed his department phone and captured several high-resolution images before uploading them into the base security database. Within seconds, the software began comparing the symbol against thousands of registered military emblems, qualification badges, historical unit insignias, and known extremist markings. Everyone waited. The scanner processed image after image before suddenly freezing without explanation. The loading symbol stopped spinning. The screen flickered once, then displayed a single unfamiliar line of text. "Access restricted. Authorization beyond local command." Ryan frowned. "That has to be a system glitch." He restarted the search. The same message appeared again before the application abruptly closed itself. "Strange," Shaw murmured, more to himself than anyone else. Ryan quickly dismissed the problem. "Old software crashes all the time." Walter quietly watched the exchange, saying nothing. His silence irritated Ryan far more than any argument could have. "Who gave you that tattoo?" Ryan demanded. "What unit were you trying to copy?" Walter slowly lifted his eyes toward the American flag flying above the gate. Its steady rhythm in the ocean wind seemed to pull his thoughts somewhere far beyond the security checkpoint. "No one copied anyone," he answered. "Some symbols are remembered. Others are forgotten." Ryan shook his head with open disbelief. "That is not an answer. It is the only one I have." Before Ryan could respond, Ensign Daniel Brooks walked out from the administration building carrying a digital tablet. He had been reviewing visitor schedules when the unusual security alert reached his workstation. "Chief," Daniel said, "I received 2 unexplained database interruptions connected to this inspection. The system automatically flagged the photograph for restricted review." Ryan laughed. "Because somebody uploaded fake artwork." Daniel looked at the image on the screen instead of at Ryan. His expression slowly changed. His eyes narrowed, not with suspicion but with recognition he could not quite explain. There was something about the broken trident. Not the symbol itself, but the tiny 3 marks beneath it. He had seen them once before somewhere deep inside a classified historical archive, while organizing records during a temporary assignment months earlier. He could not remember where, and that uncertainty bothered him far more than the frozen computer ever could. Daniel Brooks could not explain why the tiny markings beneath the broken trident unsettled him so deeply, but the feeling refused to leave. He enlarged the photograph on his tablet until every crack in the faded ink became visible. The circle surrounding the trident was not perfectly closed. There was a narrow opening on the eastern side, so small that most people would never notice it. The 3 short lines beneath the handle were equally deliberate. They were not decoration. They looked like a code. Daniel searched his memory, trying to place the image. Months earlier, he had spent 2 weeks assisting the Historical Records Division while several classified archives were transferred into a new digital system. Most of the documents had been sealed before he was allowed to finish reviewing them, but one photograph had remained on his screen for only a few seconds before disappearing. It had shown a faded emblem almost identical to the one now resting on Walter Mercer's arm. Daniel remembered because the file carried no unit designation, no operation name, and no service branch. It contained only a warning that read, "Historical access restricted by naval authority." Ryan Cole noticed Daniel staring at the screen. "Do not tell me you are buying into this story." Daniel hesitated. "I am not saying he is telling the truth." Ryan smiled with satisfaction. Good. I am saying I have seen something similar before. Ryan's confidence faded for only an instant before returning. Then somebody copied it years ago. That is how fake symbols spread. Walter remained perfectly still. The morning breeze lifted the loose fabric of his jacket as though the ocean itself refused to disturb him. His breathing stayed slow and even. His eyes drifted toward the bay where distant naval vessels rested against the sparkling water. They seemed much closer than the voices surrounding him. Chief Gregory Shaw folded his arms while studying the old man instead of the tattoo. "Mr. Mercer," he asked in a calm voice, "when was the last time you came onto a military installation?" Walter answered without hesitation. 1981. Ryan immediately shook his head. Impossible. There is no visitor record going back that far. Walter gave the slightest nod. There would not be. Ryan sighed loudly. Everything about this keeps getting more unbelievable. Daniel looked up from the tablet. "Sir, may I ask one question?" Walter turned toward him. "Of course. Why does the circle have an opening?" For the first time since arriving at the gate, something changed in Walter's expression. It was almost invisible. A faint sadness settled behind his pale blue eyes, carrying the weight of memories that had survived far longer than the ink itself. He lowered his voice until Daniel had to step slightly closer to hear. "Because not everyone came home." The words lingered in the salty air long after they were spoken. Even Ryan remained silent for a brief moment before dismissing them as another dramatic invention. Daniel, however, felt something entirely different. The answer matched a fragment of handwritten notes he vaguely remembered seeing beside that classified photograph months ago. He could not recall the entire sentence, only the final words. "Circle left open. Never completed." He looked back down at the digital image. The resemblance was too precise to ignore. Without announcing his decision, Daniel quietly stepped away from the inspection lane, opened an encrypted communications application on his government tablet, attached the photograph of Walter Mercer's tattoo, and selected a single contact listed deep inside the Naval Special Warfare Historical Archive. He hesitated only long enough to type one sentence. "Can anyone identify this symbol?" He pressed send. Less than 5 seconds later, before anyone around the checkpoint even realized he had transmitted the message, the application displayed an automatic response unlike anything Daniel had ever seen. "Processing request. Clearance verification initiated. Please remain available." The notification remained on Daniel Brooks' tablet for only 3 seconds before disappearing behind a blank security screen. But those 3 seconds were enough to send a quiet chill through him. He had worked with classified systems before. They did not answer ordinary requests with clearance verification. They either rejected them or accepted them. This response was different. It acknowledged the image, then immediately concealed itself. Daniel looked toward Walter Mercer again. The old veteran had not moved. The steel cuffs rested loosely against his weathered wrists while the ocean breeze carried the distant cries of gulls across the checkpoint. It was almost as though he already knew someone, somewhere, had finally recognized the forgotten symbol. Ryan Cole broke the silence with another impatient sigh. "Chief, we have more than enough for probable cause." Gregory Shaw glanced toward the evidence envelope containing the old plastic card marked Titiline, then toward the faded photograph lying beside it. "Finish the inventory first," he answered evenly. "Everything gets documented." Ryan nodded and carefully unfolded the weathered photograph that had been inside Walter's wallet. Time had bleached most of the colors away, leaving only pale shades of blue and gray. 6 young men stood shoulder to shoulder beside the dark silhouette of a submarine resting quietly at a dock under heavy clouds. Every face except one had been deliberately scratched away. Deep lines crossed the image where sharp metal had carved through the paper decades earlier. Only Walter remained untouched, standing near the center with a calm expression that looked strangely familiar despite the 50 years separating the photograph from the man standing before them now. Ryan frowned. Why would somebody destroy every other face? Walter answered without looking at the picture. "Because they asked to disappear." Ryan laughed softly. Convenient answer. It was not convenience. Walter's voice carried neither anger nor pride. It was the price they accepted. Gregory Shaw reached for the photograph and examined it more carefully. The submarine itself caught his attention. There were no visible hull numbers. No markings. No flags. Even the pier behind it seemed intentionally cropped to remove identifying details. It looked less like a family keepsake and more like a document that had survived somewhere it was never meant to exist. Daniel quietly watched Shaw's expression change. The chief was beginning to ask the same questions that had been forming inside his own mind. Ryan remained unconvinced. "Enough stories," he said firmly. "Mr. Mercer, I am giving you another opportunity. Tell us exactly which Navy Special Warfare unit you served with." Walter slowly raised his eyes toward him. "We did not belong to one." "Then who issued your orders?" Ryan pressed. Walter paused for several long seconds before answering. "Men whose names were never supposed to be spoken outside closed rooms." Ryan threw up his hands in frustration. There it is again. More mystery. Daniel looked down as his tablet vibrated almost silently against his palm. A new encrypted message had appeared. There was no sender name, only a government authentication seal and a single instruction displayed in plain text. "Do not release the individual. Suspend all transfer procedures immediately. Maintain respectful custody until further contact." Daniel felt his heartbeat quicken. Before he could say a word, a second message arrived. This one was even shorter. "Has Walter Mercer requested to see Vice Admiral Thomas Hale?" Daniel slowly looked up from the screen. Walter was already looking directly at him, his pale blue eyes calm and unreadable, as though he had been expecting that exact question to arrive all along. Daniel Brooks felt the weight of the encrypted message settle in his hands more heavily than the government-issued tablet itself. He read the two sentences again, making certain he had not misunderstood them. "Maintain respectful custody. Has Walter Mercer requested to see Vice Admiral Thomas Hale?" Neither instruction sounded like an automated response. Someone on the other end already knew Walter's name before Daniel had typed it into any follow-up report. That realization sent an uneasy silence through him. He looked toward Chief Gregory Shaw, wondering whether to reveal what had just arrived. Before he could speak, Ryan Cole reached for Walter's arm again. "We are done playing riddles," Ryan said. "You are coming inside until investigators sort this out." As Ryan's hand closed around the old veteran's forearm, his thumb brushed across the faded black ink of the broken trident. The contact was brief, almost careless. Walter did not pull away, yet something changed behind his pale blue eyes. The sounds of the checkpoint seemed to drift farther and farther away. The steady hum of security. Scanners faded beneath another rhythm, slower and deeper. The distant cry of gulls dissolved into waves striking steel somewhere beyond sight. The smell of warm pavement disappeared beneath the sharp scent of salt water, machine oil, and cold ocean air. For a single heartbeat, Walter Mercer was no longer standing beneath bright California sunshine. He was 24 years old again, standing silently inside the narrow hull of a submarine where red emergency lights painted every face with restless shadows. Water dripped steadily from overhead pipes. No one spoke above a whisper. 6 young men stood shoulder to shoulder, their equipment simple, their uniforms completely free of names, flags, or recognizable insignia. One of them unfolded a weathered chart across a steel table, while another quietly adjusted the compass beneath a dim red lamp. At the far end of the compartment stood a young naval officer with determined blue eyes. Thomas Hale looked barely old enough to command anyone, yet every man inside the vessel trusted him without question. Walter remembered the silence more than anything else. There were no speeches, no promises of glory, only a quiet understanding that when the hatch opened, history would never record where they had gone. A small piece of black metal rested on the chart beside the compass. It was shaped like a broken trident. One by one, each man touched it with 2 fingers before stepping away. Not as a ceremony, as a promise. The memory ended as suddenly as it had begun. The security checkpoint returned in an instant. The bright morning sun reflected from parked vehicles. The American flag cracked sharply above the gate. Ryan released Walter's arm without noticing anything unusual. "Are you listening?" he asked impatiently. Walter blinked once before answering. "I never stopped." Daniel had been watching the old veteran's face throughout the entire exchange. He had seen something impossible to explain. Walter had not looked frightened or confused. He had looked as though he had traveled somewhere no one else could reach. Daniel lowered his voice as he stepped closer. "Mr. Mercer," he asked carefully, "why today?" Walter turned toward him, with the same quiet expression he had carried since arriving at the gate. "Because promises do not expire." Before Daniel could ask another question, his tablet vibrated again. This time the screen did not display words immediately. Instead, a government authentication seal expanded slowly across the display before revealing a single instruction marked with the highest priority level Daniel had ever encountered during his service. Confirm the subject remains at Gate 7. Senior Command is already en route. The message remained glowing on Daniel Brooks' tablet, like a quiet warning no one else could see. Senior Command is already en route. He locked the screen without another word and slipped the device against his side. Whatever was happening had already moved beyond the authority of everyone standing at Gate 7. Ryan Cole noticed Daniel's sudden silence. Something wrong, he asked. Daniel forced a calm expression. Probably another database verification. Ryan shrugged, satisfied with the answer, and turned his attention back to Walter Mercer. You know what I cannot understand? Ryan asked. People spend years earning the right to wear the trident. Then somebody like you walks in wearing a story instead. Walter looked toward the water beyond the security barriers where sunlight shimmered across San Diego Bay. His voice remained steady. Stories disappear. Promises stay. Ryan shook his head. You keep talking like someone writing history instead of someone living it. Walter smiled almost invisibly. Sometimes there is no difference. A gust of ocean wind swept across the checkpoint, lifting the loose edge of Walter's old jacket. The faded tattoo rested quietly against weathered skin, unchanged by the passing decades. Daniel found himself staring at it again. The broken trident no longer looked incomplete. It looked intentional. Every uneven line seemed placed with purpose rather than skill. The open circle was not a mistake. It was a decision. Without warning, Walter's eyes drifted beyond the present once more. The bright California morning faded beneath another memory carried by the rhythm of distant waves. The narrow submarine compartment returned, with its dim red lights reflecting from brushed steel walls. 6 young men stood around the navigation chart, while the vessel moved silently beneath the surface of a cold black ocean. No voices rose above conversation level. Every movement was deliberate. Lieutenant Thomas Hale traced a route across the map with a pencil before looking toward the others. Once we leave the boat, he said quietly, there will be no official support, no radio confirmation, no rescue request. If we are discovered, Washington never heard of us. No one questioned the order. One by one, the men simply nodded. Walter remembered the calm on their faces more than the danger waiting outside. They had trained together for years. They trusted one another more completely than words could ever explain. Beside the chart rested the same broken black trident carved from a piece of damaged metal. Samuel Pierce picked it up and placed it into Walter's hand. If one of us makes it home, Samuel said with a faint smile, someone has to remember all 6. Walter closed his fingers around the cold metal. I will. Thomas Hale looked directly at him. Not just remember us. Remember why we went. The submarine gently shifted beneath the ocean currents. A quiet bell sounded somewhere deeper inside the vessel. An unseen sailor announced that they were approaching the release point. The compartment fell completely silent. No speeches followed. No dramatic farewell. Only 6 men exchanging one final look that required no explanation. The memory dissolved as the sharp electronic tone of the checkpoint scanner pulled Walter back into the present. Ryan was speaking again, though his words seemed distant at first. Mr. Mercer, transportation is on the way. Until investigators arrive, you will remain here. Walter slowly nodded. That is exactly where I intended to be. Daniel's tablet vibrated once more. This time the notification contained only 4 words, each marked with immediate priority. Delay all transfer orders. Arrival in 12 minutes. The 12 minutes seemed to stretch far longer than the clock suggested. At Gate 7, every routine movement continued exactly as it always had. Vehicles rolled through inspection lanes. Security officers checked credentials. Radios crackled with ordinary reports. Yet beneath the familiar rhythm, something invisible had begun to change. Daniel Brooks could feel it without understanding why. Every few moments he glanced toward the highway leading into the base, almost expecting something to appear beyond the morning haze. Nothing did. Ryan Cole interpreted the silence differently. To him, the absence of immediate answers only reinforced his certainty that Walter Mercer was another man trapped inside stories from a distant past. You still have time to explain yourself, Ryan said, folding his arms. Once investigators arrive, Your options become much smaller. Walter looked at the younger sailor with the same patient expression he had carried since sunrise. Young man, he answered quietly. Truth does not become larger because more people examine it. Ryan gave a tired smile. Neither do old legends. Walter simply nodded. That depends on who remembers them. The words settled between them before dissolving into the sound of flags snapping sharply in the Pacific wind. Daniel looked again at the faded tattoo resting on Walter's forearm. The broken trident no longer seemed like a symbol of military pride. It felt like a promise preserved in ink. Almost without realizing it, he found himself wondering about the 5 missing faces in the old photograph. Men who had once stood together beside an unmarked submarine. Men whose names no longer appeared anywhere the public could see. Walter's eyes drifted beyond the checkpoint once again as another memory quietly surfaced. The submarine had already reached its destination. A narrow hatch opened overhead, revealing nothing but darkness and the steady sound of waves moving across an empty coastline. Cold sea air rushed inside the compartment. One by one, the 6 young men climbed toward the opening without hesitation. Walter remembered Samuel Pierce stopping just before the ladder. Instead of speaking, Samuel reached into a small waterproof pouch and removed a simple steel engraving tool. He pressed the broken trident against a narrow strip of black metal and carefully carved 3 short lines beneath its handle. Thomas Hale watched silently before asking, "Why 3?" Samuel smiled faintly. 3 things nobody can replace. Walter remembered answering before anyone else could. Honor. Samuel nodded once. Another member of the team quietly added, loyalty. Thomas finished the thought. Memory. Samuel looked around the compartment one final time. As long as those 3 remain, none of us truly disappear. He handed the unfinished symbol to Walter. Do not complete the circle unless every man comes home. Walter studied the open space left along the edge of the design. He understood immediately. The circle would remain broken until all 6 names could stand together again. It was not an emblem of victory. It was a reminder of absence. The memory slowly faded beneath the bright California sky. Walter lowered his eyes to the faded tattoo resting on his own arm. Decades had softened the ink, but the open space remained exactly as Samuel had left it. Daniel noticed Walter looking at the symbol and quietly asked, "You never finished it, did you?" Walter answered almost in a whisper, "Some promises are not ours to finish." Before Daniel could ask what that meant, every radio at the checkpoint came alive at the same instant. A calm voice from base operations spoke only one sentence. Priority motorcade entering the installation. Clear all primary access routes immediately. The calm voice over the radio disappeared as quickly as it had arrived, but its effect was immediate. Security personnel throughout the checkpoint straightened their posture. Traffic barriers shifted into new positions. Patrol vehicles quietly cleared the center lane leading toward the command buildings. No one questioned the order. Priority motorcades did not announce themselves unless someone of extraordinary authority was approaching. Ryan Cole looked toward the highway before glancing back at Walter Mercer. "Looks like your timing could not be worse," he said. "Nobody is getting through this gate now." Walter watched the empty road without the slightest trace of disappointment. "I was never trying to go through it." Ryan frowned. "Then why come here?" Walter answered with the same quiet certainty that had unsettled everyone around him since sunrise. "Because this is where he would have to pass." Daniel Brooks felt another vibration against his side. He unlocked the encrypted tablet just enough to read the latest update. There was no greeting, no signature, only one question. Has the subject remained cooperative? Daniel typed a single reply. Yes, completely cooperative. The response arrived almost instantly. Maintain current position. Do not relocate him under any circumstances. Daniel slowly slipped the tablet back into its protective case. The instruction was no longer a recommendation. It had become an order. Chief Gregory Shaw noticed the subtle exchange, but chose not to interrupt. Instead, he picked up the faded photograph one more time and examined it beneath the morning light. Something that had escaped him earlier suddenly became visible. Reflected in the polished surface of the submarine behind the 6 young men was the faint outline of another figure standing just outside the frame. The reflection was blurred by age, but one detail remained unmistakable. The man wore the broad shoulder boards of a senior naval officer. Shaw quietly lowered the photograph. Mr. Mercer, he asked carefully, who took this picture? Walter looked at the photograph without reaching for it. Someone who could never admit he was there. Shaw absorbed the answer without another word. It no longer sounded like an attempt to impress anyone. It sounded like a memory protected by time. Across the checkpoint, sailors continued directing routine traffic, unaware that an ordinary security inspection had quietly transformed into something entirely different. Daniel found himself studying Walter instead of the evidence. The old veteran showed none of the anxiety most detained visitors displayed. He was not checking the road. He was not asking for updates. He simply stood with the patience of someone who had spent a lifetime waiting for the right moment instead of forcing it. Another gust of wind swept across the bay, carrying the distant scent of salt water through the inspection lanes. Walter closed his eyes for only a moment. The sound of the waves blended once more with another shoreline many decades earlier. Dawn had barely touched the horizon as 6 young figures stepped silently from a small inflatable boat onto a narrow stretch of wet sand. No voices broke the silence. No orders needed repeating. Lieutenant Thomas Hale turned briefly toward Walter before disappearing into the mist with the others, each man carrying nothing more visible than determination and trust. The memory vanished before another step could be taken. Back in the present, the low rumble of powerful engines began rolling across the base from beyond the entrance. It was still too far away for anyone to see the approaching vehicles, but every experienced sailor at Gate 7 immediately recognized the sound of an official command convoy moving with uninterrupted priority. Ryan instinctively adjusted his uniform. Gregory Shaw stood a little straighter. Daniel quietly looked toward Walter. The old veteran did not turn toward the road. Instead, a faint, almost invisible smile appeared across his weathered face, as though he had already recognized exactly who was coming long before anyone else heard the engines. The first escort motorcycle appeared around the distant bend with quiet precision, its blue lights reflecting across the polished pavement without the urgency of an emergency. One after another, black government sport utility vehicles followed in perfect formation, moving through the cleared access lane with practiced discipline. Every sailor standing at Gate 7 instinctively shifted into a sharper posture. Conversations ended. Radios fell silent except for essential traffic. Even Ryan Cole's confidence seemed to soften beneath the weight of an arrival that clearly outranked everyone present. "That is a command convoy," he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. Chief Gregory Shaw nodded once without taking his eyes off the approaching vehicles. "Higher than base command," he replied. Daniel Brooks felt another vibration from the encrypted tablet before he even looked down. The newest message contained only one sentence. "The Vice Admiral has departed the conference room. Estimated arrival less than 4 minutes." Daniel read it twice before locking the screen. His pulse quickened. Until that moment, every possibility still allowed for misunderstanding. Now there was none. Someone at the highest level had interrupted an official meeting because of the quiet old man standing only a few feet away. Walter Mercer remained exactly where he had been since sunrise. The steel cuffs rested against his wrists without complaint. The faded tattoo caught the morning light as the Pacific breeze gently lifted the sleeve of his old jacket. He watched the convoy approach with neither excitement nor relief. Instead, his attention drifted toward the evidence table where the worn photograph still rested beside the old Titeline card. "Would you hand me the picture?" Walter asked softly. Gregory Shaw hesitated only briefly before picking it up. Instead of passing it directly to Walter, he looked at the old veteran's face. "You recognize every one of them, do you not?" Walter's answer came without hesitation. "Every morning." Shaw slowly placed the photograph into Walter's cuffed hands. The old paper trembled slightly, not because of fear, but because 82 years eventually leave their mark on every steady hand. Walter studied the 6 young faces for several quiet seconds before his thumb gently rested over the scratched portions where 5 identities had disappeared beneath deliberate scars. "They deserved better," he whispered. Daniel stood close enough to hear the words. "Who scratched them out?" Walter looked toward the distant convoy before answering. "The same people who asked them to save lives without leaving footprints." Daniel absorbed the sentence in silence. It carried no bitterness, only acceptance. Ryan looked from the photograph to Walter again. For the first time all morning, he asked a question without accusation. Why keep it if it only reminds you of what was lost? Walter smiled faintly. Because forgetting would finish what time started. The growing sound of engines rolled across the checkpoint as the lead vehicles entered the final approach. Sunlight flashed across polished black paint and chrome trim. Base personnel along the roadway stood respectfully, aside while the convoy advanced without stopping. Daniel noticed something unusual through the windshield of the second vehicle. The senior officer seated inside was not reviewing paperwork or speaking on a phone. He was looking straight ahead with complete focus, as though nothing in the world mattered beyond reaching Gate 7. Walter slowly folded the faded photograph and held it against his chest. His pale blue eyes remained fixed on the approaching convoy, almost too quietly for anyone else to hear. He spoke a single sentence carried away by the ocean wind. "You are late, Thomas, but you came after all." The convoy slowed with remarkable precision before coming to a smooth stop only a few yards from the security barrier. The engines fell silent one by one until the only sounds remaining were the steady snap of American flags overhead and the distant rhythm of waves rolling across San Diego Bay. Every sailor at Gate 7 instinctively stood straighter. Even those who had not yet seen the arriving passenger understood from the disciplined silence alone that someone of extraordinary authority had stepped onto the base. The rear passenger door of the second vehicle opened without ceremony. A polished black shoe touched the pavement first, followed by the crisp white trousers and dark dress jacket of Vice Admiral Thomas Hale. His silver hair reflected the morning light, and the rows of ribbons across his chest caught brief flashes of gold as he stepped forward. There was no hesitation in his stride, no greeting to the assembled officers, no glance toward the checkpoint itself. His eyes searched only for one person. Ryan Cole immediately snapped to attention. "Vice Admiral on deck." The call echoed across the entrance. Every uniformed sailor stood motionless. Chief Gregory Shaw saluted with practiced precision. Daniel Brooks did the same, though his attention remained fixed on the Vice Admiral's face. Something about Hale's expression surprised him. It was not anger. It was not confusion. It was something much older. A look carried by someone who had spent decades hoping to see a familiar face one more time without believing it would ever happen. Walter. Mercer remained exactly where he stood. He made no attempt to straighten his jacket. He did not step forward. He simply waited with the patience of a man who had already lived through every important moment of his life long ago. Hale walked past Ryan without acknowledging the salute. He passed Gregory Shaw without slowing his pace. He crossed directly to Walter until only a few feet separated them. For several long seconds, neither man spoke. The checkpoint disappeared into complete silence. Hale's eyes slowly moved from Walter's weathered face to the faded tattoo resting beneath the rolled sleeve of his jacket. The broken trident, the unfinished circle, the three small lines beneath its handle. His breathing caught almost imperceptibly. He looked back into Walter's pale blue eyes, and something behind the Vice Admiral's carefully disciplined expression finally gave way. "You kept it," Hale said quietly. Walter answered with the faint smile of an old friend. "I told Samuel I would." Hale closed his eyes for only a brief moment, as though hearing a voice carried across half a century. When he opened them again, he stepped one pace closer. Without asking permission, he reached toward Walter's cuffed hands. Ryan instinctively shifted his weight, uncertain whether to intervene before immediately stopping himself. Hale gently lifted the old veteran's wrists just enough to examine the steel cuffs resting against them. His jaw tightened. He looked slowly toward Ryan Cole. The young petty officer felt the full weight of the Vice Admiral's gaze before a single word had been spoken. Yet Hale did not raise his voice. He did not criticize anyone. Instead, he returned his attention to Walter. "I am sorry," he said with complete sincerity. "You should never have been made to wait at this gate." Walter's answer was soft enough that only those nearest could hear. "Thomas, compared to 50 years, this morning was nothing at all." The words settled over everyone standing there with a quiet force no command could equal. Ryan stared at the two men in disbelief. Daniel felt his heartbeat quicken. Gregory Shaw lowered his salute for the first time, realizing that what he was witnessing was no ordinary reunion between a senior officer and a retired veteran. It was the return of a promise that had survived longer than almost anyone still living remembered. Vice Admiral Thomas Hale kept his eyes on Walter Mercer for another long moment before reaching into the inside pocket of his dress coat. Every movement was slow, deliberate, and filled with the kind of discipline that only decades of service could produce. He removed a small brass key attached to a simple leather fob and held it in his open hand. Without speaking, he stepped behind Walter and carefully unlocked the steel handcuffs. The soft metallic click echoed across Gate 7 with astonishing clarity. No one moved. No one spoke. The cuffs slipped free and rested in Hale's hands instead of Walter's wrists. The Vice Admiral looked down at them for a brief second before quietly handing them to Chief Gregory Shaw. "These will not be needed again," he said calmly. There was no anger in his voice. No accusation. Only certainty. Shaw accepted the cuffs with both hands. "Yes, sir." Ryan Cole remained frozen where he stood. His mind searched desperately for an explanation that no longer existed. The old man he had confidently accused now stood before one of the highest-ranking officers in the United States Navy, not as a suspect, but as someone receiving a level of respect Ryan had rarely witnessed. Hale turned back toward Walter. "You carried it all these years." Walter slowly unfolded the weathered photograph still resting in his hands. The edges had become soft from decades of careful handling. He offered it to Hale without a word. The Vice Admiral accepted it with remarkable gentleness. His eyes moved across the image until they reached the 5 faces that had been deliberately scratched away. He lightly brushed one finger across the damaged paper, as though trying to remember features that time had refused to preserve. "Samuel always hated photographs," Hale said with the faintest smile. Walter nodded. He said memories belonged in people, not paper. Hale looked toward the bay before quietly answering. He was wrong about one thing. Sometimes paper is all that survives. "Daniel." Brooks listened without interrupting. Every sentence revealed another piece of a history no classroom had ever taught. Ryan lowered his eyes toward the pavement. For the first time that morning, he understood that the greatest mistake had not been placing handcuffs on an old veteran. It had been believing that official records contained every truth worth knowing. Hale folded the photograph with extraordinary care before placing it back into Walter's hands. "Did you bring it because of today?" Walter nodded once. "And because I kept another promise." Slowly, he reached inside his faded jacket and removed a weathered waterproof envelope that had clearly been protected for many years. The paper inside had yellowed with age, but the seal remained unbroken. Walter extended it toward Hale. "Samuel Pierce asked me to give this to his daughter when the day finally came that his name could be spoken without being erased." Hale accepted the envelope with both hands. For the first time since arriving, his composure visibly faltered. He looked at the familiar handwriting across the front before carefully closing his eyes. When he opened them again, there was unmistakable gratitude behind them. "You carried this for 50 years. Walter answered quietly. "It was never mine to open." A deep silence settled across everyone gathered at the checkpoint. Even the wind seemed softer. Hale drew a slow breath before turning toward the assembled sailors. His voice remained calm, yet every word carried unmistakable authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, you have spent this morning standing beside a man whose service protected lives that history was never allowed to acknowledge. His records were sealed by order of this government. His silence was not absence. It was duty." No one spoke. Ryan Cole slowly lifted his eyes toward Walter Mercer, seeing him for the first time not as an elderly stranger wearing a faded tattoo, but as a guardian of promises that had quietly outlived half a century. No one at Gate 7 lowered their eyes after the Vice Admiral finished speaking. The silence had changed. Only minutes earlier it had been filled with uncertainty. Now it carried something much heavier: respect. Thomas Hale carefully placed the sealed envelope inside the breast pocket of his dress uniform as though it were the most valuable document he had ever carried. He then turned back toward Walter Mercer, studying the familiar lines of the old veteran's face. Time had stolen strength from his shoulders and speed from his steps, but it had failed to diminish the quiet steadiness that Hale remembered from another lifetime. "There is something I should have done many years ago," the Vice Admiral said softly. Walter tilted his head slightly. "You already kept your promise. You lived." Hale gave a slow smile. Living was only the beginning. Without another word, he reached toward the cuff of his immaculate white uniform and slowly rolled back his left sleeve. The movement was so unexpected that every sailor standing nearby instinctively leaned forward. Beneath the crisp fabric rested weathered skin marked by an old black tattoo. It had faded over the decades, softened by age, but its design remained unmistakable. A broken trident, an unfinished circle, 3 small lines beneath the handle. It was identical. Ryan Cole stared in complete disbelief. Daniel Brooks felt every piece of the morning suddenly fall into place. Gregory Shaw quietly exhaled, realizing that the symbol everyone had dismissed as counterfeit had been carried for decades by one of the highest-ranking officers in the United States Navy. Walter looked at the tattoo without surprise. He simply smiled with quiet affection. "Yours faded better than mine," he said. After another, Chief Gregory Shaw, Daniel Brooks, the convoy security detail, the motorcycle escort officers, and finally every sailor standing within sight followed the Vice Admiral's example. Ryan Cole was the last. His hand rose slowly, almost trembling as understanding replaced certainty. Walter remained still for several seconds, looking across the line of raised hands with quiet humility. His pale blue eyes reflected neither pride nor triumph, only gratitude for the men who had not been forgotten after all. At last, he returned the salute with careful precision, his older hand moving more slowly but with undiminished dignity. No applause followed. None was needed. The wind carried only the steady sound of flags above the checkpoint and distant waves rolling against the California shoreline. Hale lowered his hand first. "Today," he said quietly, "the record remains classified, but respect does not." He turned toward Ryan, not with condemnation, but with calm instruction. "Petty Officer Cole, remember this morning for the rest of your career. Regulations protect our bases. Humility protects our honor." Ryan swallowed hard and nodded once. "Yes, sir." Walter looked toward the open gate, then back at the assembled sailors. "The symbol was never meant to make us different," he said softly. "It was meant to remind us that someone always carries the names of those who cannot stand beside us anymore." The words settled gently across Gate 7, leaving behind a silence no one there would ever forget. The salute ended, but no one hurried to move. It was as though Gate 7 itself understood that some moments deserved to remain untouched a little longer. Vice Admiral Thomas Hale lowered his hand and looked toward the waiting convoy before turning back to Walter Mercer. "There is one place you should see before you leave today," he said quietly. Walter smiled with the patient expression that had accompanied him through every hour of the morning. "I wondered how long it would take you to invite me." Hale gestured toward the nearest vehicle, but Walter gently shook his head. "I would rather walk." The Vice Admiral nodded without hesitation. "Then we will walk." Together, side by side, the two old friends began making their way through the open gate, while sailors instinctively stepped aside, creating a silent path without receiving a single order. Ryan Cole watched them disappear beyond the checkpoint before quietly approaching Chief Gregory Shaw. "Chief," he said softly, "I followed every regulation." Shaw looked at the young petty officer with understanding rather than criticism. "You did," he answered. "Now remember what today taught you. Regulations tell us what to check. Character tells us how to treat people while we are checking." Ryan slowly nodded. The lesson settled far deeper than any formal reprimand ever could. Daniel Brooks remained standing near the inspection table where the faded photograph had rested only moments earlier. He looked toward the empty space, then opened his tablet and began updating the incident report. He stopped before writing the final line. After several seconds of thought, he erased the original heading and replaced it with a single sentence. "Visitor identity confirmed by senior command. Respectful escort authorized." It was the most accurate description he could offer, even though it barely hinted at what had truly happened. Nearly 20 minutes later, Walter and Thomas Hale entered a quiet memorial room inside the command building. Sunlight streamed gently through tall windows, illuminating a polished black stone wall engraved with hundreds of names. Near the far end stood 6 empty bronze nameplates that had remained blank for decades. Hale carefully removed the sealed envelope from his pocket and rested it beside the empty plaques. "This room has been waiting for you," he said. Walter looked at the 6 untouched spaces for a long time. His weathered hand gently rested against the cool stone before he spoke. "Not for me," he whispered. "For all of us." Hale nodded. "The review board completed its work last month. The operation will remain classified, but the names no longer will." One by one, engraved bronze plates were brought forward and secured beneath the waiting spaces. Walter Mercer, Thomas Hale, Samuel Pierce, Robert Keane, Michael Doran, Edward Shaw. Walter quietly removed his hand from the wall and smiled with peaceful satisfaction. The unfinished circle that had lived on his arm for half a century finally felt complete, even though the tattoo itself would never change. Outside, the California wind continued carrying the sound of distant waves across the base, just as it had on the morning 6 young men once boarded a submarine without expecting recognition. Walter turned toward the exit, pausing only once to look back at the 6 restored names. They made it home after all, he said. Thomas Hale answered with quiet certainty. Because you never stopped carrying them. Together they walked into the afternoon light, leaving behind no speeches, no celebration, and no demand for recognition. Only 6 names returned to their rightful place, and one forgotten promise finally fulfilled. Some legends never ask to be remembered. They simply spend a lifetime remembering everyone else.